Yakshini Priya Serju and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be sharing with you some of my art tips as well as talking you through a recent painting that I've done in acrylics of a green sea turtle. So for this painting, as you can see, I've already done the background. The background is done with acrylic paints, diluted with water. I'm starting to paint in the ocean floor with a little sand mixed with a little bit of white and quite a bit of water just to make it a bit transparent. You can see I'm starting to lay in the blue over the brown. That is to just give it the look of the ocean, because under the ocean you do not see brown as sand that you would see normally on the ground. So it's going to have a little bit of blue hint to it, or blue tint to it. So you can see I'm painting in some of the background in the distant plants, seaweeds, ocean plants and seaweeds. So then I'm going in forward and you can see I am painting in the foreground as well. I'm completely going over the brown paint, but I am just trying to leave a hint of it here and there to give the look of it being the ocean floor. I've also added some shadows in there just to make it look more uneven, because obviously the floor is not straight and not flat. And over here you can see I'm starting to put in the rays of light coming in through the water surface. You can see I'm using a very, it's a mixture of blue and white. It's not just plain white from the tube diluted with water. And I am also using a mop brush to smoothen it out. So I'm obviously the surface of the water, there are rays that are going to be coming in through the surface of the water onto the ocean floor. So those rays, I'm just putting those little ripples onto the water surface just to show through. When you're looking from in under the water, you can see those little water light reflecting through the water. So you can see, or light shining through the water. So you can see as I'm getting to more detail of um, the light coming through, I'm getting a little more detailed. I'm smoothing it off. I'm using a little more lighter colors than the initial color that I was using. That's just to get a little more definition that you can make out that is the light coming in from the surface. Remember again, with acrylic paints, you got to work quickly. But if you use water, I use water to dilute my paint. I don't use the mediums. I don't like the texture or the feel of the paint when you use the mediums to prolong the drying time of acrylics. I've tried them. It doesn't work for me. Water works fine, although you do have to work quickly. But the good thing with acrylics is if you make a mistake or if it dries up too fast, you just can paint over it. So as you can see there, it is that I'm using a little lighter color now. It's white mixed with blue, just to give a bit more definition to those surface ripples on the water. And I am coming through. Remember, there's going to be more in the center, and as you move outwards towards the outer ends, you will have less ripples. Okay, so as you can see, I'm started in the sea turtle. I have drawn him onto the canvas, or I've transferred him. Actually did the initial drawing on normal photocopy paper, and then I transferred the image to my canvas as just an outline, just so I can see where everything goes. So you can see I'm started to work on this turtle. I'm starting to layer in. I can't talk right now. I started to layer in all the underpainting of his shell, of his body, of his pattern on his flippers, on his skin, just so that I know where everything is. And with acrylics, I prefer to start dark to light because it's very opaque. The light colors will come through across much more brighter when I put them on a darker color. So I'm just going over with the shell, getting all the shape in there, getting all the design. The flippers as well. I'm just getting in some of that detail into the flippers and some of the patterns that are on his flippers. Sea turtles have a lot of patterns on them, and they have a lot of little shapes that you can just make sure you paint in, and it just makes it look very three-dimensional. At the moment it's looking very flat. It's just the underpainting going on there. Now, one more thing I'd like to point out is try to have good reference photos. Whether you're using a single reference photo or multiple reference photos, try to have a good one. The better reference photo you have, the better the outcome of your painting will be, and the easier it'll be for you to interpret that reference photo onto your painting or your drawing. So I've done some of the creases on his neck. And now I'm just going in with a little lighter color. It's actually white mixed with some green. It's not just white out of the tube, obviously diluted with water. I'm just taking it across all the patterns and all the shapes on his shell and on his flippers and his face. Sea turtles have got beautiful patterns on them. It was really fun doing the sea turtle. Okay, I'm adding some highlights, the highlighted areas on his face and neck. Remember, you got to have your highlights and your shadows in your drawings or paintings if you want them to look realistic and three-dimensional. I'm not talking super realistic, I'm not there yet, but I'm aiming for a more realistic look. It must look like the animal that I am drawing or painting. So I prefer getting as much shadows in there, texture in there, highlights in there, just so that the animal, whatever it is that I'm painting, looks three-dimensional and looks real. It does not look like a cartoon, for example. Okay, so as you can see, this is so far what I did for that day, and I called it a night after this. He looks a little neon. The lighting was not so good because I was filming at night and the camera was not picking up the actual color, but this is more closer to the actual color that the painting actually looks like. You can see the ground also looks like it's lumpy and it's not even, but that's the look I'm looking for. So now I'm going in with another layer of color over the ocean floor, and I am putting in some places where I'm going to put in some rocks, and there's going to be some plants growing there and seagrass, seaweed. I'm just darkening some of the areas that I've painted with the background. Obviously, the background is not going to have much detail, and it's also going to be not particular colors. You will see more bluish, darker blues for shadows, and just to show it in the distance. That creates a lot of depth. If you're going to bring in at that distance, if you're going to paint those seaweed or plants as green or anything like a brighter color, it's going to look as if it's flat because it's not going to show that there's depth going into the painting. So as you can see, I'm just working on the ground and getting the ocean floor a little darker, putting in some blues. There's some blues and grays that I've got in there, but I'm still letting some of that sand color show through. We want some of that to show through. Okay, now I started working on the shell. I'm using a green on his shell just to get some of that color in there. There will be more layers on top of this. This is just to get the pattern of his shell and get some color into him and make him look more like a green sea turtle. Remember another thing with acrylic paint, if you make a mistake, if you're not happy with something, just paint over it if it's dry already. If you can, while you're working, as you saw me use a paper towel, I usually keep a wet brush around when I'm doing certain details. So if I do something that's not right or too much paint goes on, I just take the wet brush, put it over, and I wipe it off with the paper towel. Then I can just start over with that part again and redo it to the way I want it to be. Okay, so I'm just adding some color in onto his neck and onto his face and his flipper. The good thing about acrylics is it dries really quickly, so you can get a lot more done compared to oils. I work in oils as well. That was the initial paint I started painting with, and it's very easy to blend. It gives you time to blend, and I actually was scared of acrylics that I won't be able to work fast enough. But once I got started with acrylics, I've noticed that you get used to it, and I've been doing most of my paintings this year with acrylics. In fact, I think I've only painted, I think 1 or 2 paintings this year with oil paints. Most of my paintings have been acrylics. So as you can see now, I'm just darkening all those spots on him, all his markings on his face, and I'm putting in some of the shadow areas of his shell, where his shell is over his body, to put some shadow in there. Remember, shadows and highlights is what makes the painting or drawing more three-dimensional, or the subject more three-dimensional, and it makes it more realistic looking. So you can see I'm putting in his little creases on his neck. Sea turtles have very creased necks with the skin, very creased skin. So there's a lot of little creases in there. So I'm just getting all of that in there. And you can already see the sea turtle starting to look more realistic and not so much like a cartoon anymore. It's still not there yet, but we're getting there. Okay, so now I'm adding some of the shadow areas on his flipper. And I'm just putting in some shadows on his flipper, and his other flipper. Okay, just adding a little more details into his nose and his face. And we're going back with the creases again. Getting the creases and the shadows in. For this, I'm using a very not a very thin liner brush, but I'm using a finer liner brush with paint diluted with water on it, just so that I can get the details in. And I'm just adding some highlights onto his face, onto his neck. Okay, now I'm going in with the highlights of the flippers. Remember, the light is coming in from the surface of the water, and he's underneath the water, so obviously the light is going to be shining on him. So certain areas of him will have lighter parts to it than the rest of him. He'll have shadows, he'll have highlights. Obviously the highlights is wherever the light is reflecting onto his body. Okay, I'm back to the creases again, and his nose and his eyes. When I paint, I'm all over the place. I don't stick in one section. Okay, now I'm starting to work on the shell with the green. At the moment, it doesn't look very green, but that has more green than white in it. It looks white, but once I get to the top of the shell, you will see it's more green. The camera wasn't capturing that green. See, it's more green. And that is basically what is going to make the sea turtle come alive, basically. That green, that depth, because we've got the underpainting with the darker color, we've got the shadows, we've got the highlights, we've got the lighter color, now we've got the green going over the brighter green. So it really, and we have lines, and remember, the lines are not, for the sea turtle, the lines are not uniform. Keep them varying, different lengths, different angles, different thicknesses. Some are thicker, some are thinner. Don't keep all the lines uniform or in the same angle, same direction. It's not going to look real. Even some of it is more like little blotches than actual lines on its body, on the sea turtle's body. So I'm just going in there, adding some more, touching up some highlights onto his flippers, adding some green into his flippers over there. Okay, so now I am painting in some of the rocks. I'm putting in some little fine grass onto the seagrass onto the rocks, and some foliage, underwater foliage onto the rocks. I'm using a Filbert brush with paint, but not too wet paint and not too much of paint. We're just dabbing it on there to get that furry sort of a look. Not furry, but to get that look as if it's mossy and on the rocks under the water. Touching up some of that background just to get it a little darker so that we can have more depth. And I'm going in now with some seagrass and some coral and seaweed. Now with this, I'm using a fine liner brush with a lot of paint, but a very light touch. And the paint is diluted with quite a bit of water. Not that it's transparent, it must still have an opaqueness in it, but there is a lot of water in there, and I'm having a light touch. The more harder I press with the brush, the thicker the lines are going to be. The lighter my hand is, the thinner the lines are going to be. So we need fine lines because seagrass is very fine. So we've got some fine lines, and that's creating the grass on the ocean floor. Okay, I have put in some yellow coral in this part of the video, but I didn't like it, and you will see later that I actually took Payne's gray paint and I painted over it and redid it. That's a good thing, as I said, about acrylics, is that if you don't like something, you can just paint over and do it again. With oils, you can just wipe it off with some turpentine or and clean it off and paint again. But with acrylics, we can paint over and redo it redo it where you want it to be. So you can see I added some highlights onto those rocks. I'm still busy with some of that seagrass and some of that seaweed. Okay, so now I'm just adding some more foliage in there, but most of this is going to get wiped off in a little while, as you'll see, because it just looked too bright and the yellow was just not getting the look that I wanted the painting to have. Okay, so you can see over there on the right hand side, I am painting in some coral in there. I've got the light pink or the darker pink at the bottom, and now I'm starting to paint in some of the light colors over to bring some highlights into it and to show some more depth and make it more three-dimensional. Okay, you can see I'm going to be adding some more highlights in there just to give it that look of more pink, more three-dimensional. And I'm again walking on the rocks, although I'm going to be painting over that. Okay, there we go. See, I didn't like it and I painted over it, but that's not a problem because we can just redo that again. I'm putting some browns in there as well to give it a bit more of a brownish look, and wiping off the excess with paper towel. And once it's dry, try to make sure that when you paint over, try to paint and let the paint dry. Even though acrylics dry fast, if you do happen to put a next layer over a wet paint, it'll lift off the paint from the previous layer and then it will just not look good and you have to redo that. So now you can see I painted in that green over there again, and I'm busy with the seaweed and the seagrass and the corals again. Okay, so there comes more seagrass and more coral. And then also after this video, which was not on the camera, but after I drew in the little fish, which you'll see me putting in just now, swimming around the sea turtle, I put in some air bubbles just to give them a little bit of um, nice look. Okay, you can see here, I've got the light reflecting from the water surface onto the ocean floor. You got to have some light coming in there because it's coming in all through from the top. And you will see I'm also putting some highlights onto his shell and onto his face because obviously he is getting the light reflecting onto his body from the top. The other rays coming in for the light rays that are coming through the ocean surface water, sorry, through the surface of the ocean water, and it is reflecting onto him and onto the fish and onto the floor. And you can see I've just put in some fish in there, and there you have it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this.